I figure we'll get this, oh my goodness. We'll get this one out of the way, considering we just watched part 1, so I want to see what kind of weapons they give him for part 2. I wonder if they're gonna give him more ridiculous ones this time, or if they're gonna stick with the more realistic ones. Ridiculous ones.
Actually...
Alright, there we go.
So it's actually kind of like a chainsaw. So this spinning and just going forward to the point is brilliant. Hi there, I'm Matt Easton of Scholar Gladiatoria, which is a historical fencing club and also a YouTube channel as well. And I teach people how to use weapons from across history and across continents, including things like knives and daggers, swords, axes, maces, spears, and so on and so forth.
I've got a lot on the roster right now, Keith.
25 years teaching students and also working with film, TV, and museums. And today I'm going to be looking at even more weapons from Elden Ring.
What, Pam?
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a weird looking thing. So it's sort of like a rapier and it's sort of like a longsword. First of all, are there any blades from the real world which have a spiral on them? Well, up until relatively recently, I would have said no. However, there is a type of knife, a particularly horrific type of knife, known as the Cyclone, I think, which has a spiral blade. And this is supposed to give a particularly horrific type of wound that's very difficult to treat and causes huge blood loss quickly. Now, if we consider this in sword size, does that make any sense? Possibly not. So it'd be very difficult to make. This is a fantasy setting, so I'm not going to worry about that. How would you use it? Well, the one thing I would say is absolutely don't cut with it, because it's not going to cut. It's essentially a spiral bar. It's a bit like a giant corkscrew, isn't it? So if you imagine hitting something with a corkscrew, it's not going to cut anything. If you stab something with a corkscrew, it will. Wow, look at that thing.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Awesome. I want one, but I literally can't think of a sword maker who'd be able to make that. Apart from the complication of making the giant corkscrew, the heat treatment of that.
Oh my god, could you imagine sharpening that? That sounds like hell. Like, okay, so I've worked in a rolling mill before, so I do know a little bit about metal forming when it comes to getting a straight piece of metal into weird different shapes. And I could tell you right now, this would be incredibly hard to make. This would be incredibly hard to make, especially to make it smooth like that. Because then you would really... Okay, so what I'm seeing here, there's a long pole and it has metal wrapped around it in a spiral. How in the hell? That would be some flimsy ass metal. It'd be really hard to make it. Like, you could make it with really weak metal, very thin, but then it would be so weak. It would be purely ceremonial. Making this functional would be so fucking difficult unless you got different pieces and, you know, hammered them into shape and then welded them all together in sections, but then grinding that down and... Oh my god. That sounds like a fucking nightmare. All those twisty, weird angles. You'd need a hand grinder. It definitely wouldn't be a single piece of metal. It would, Oh, but Shell, it's a little bit more difficult than an auger, though, to make it functional like that, you know? It would be... Making it by hand would be super fucking difficult. That's the thing. Like, it is different from an auger. It would totally suck. This would suck so fucking bad to make. Yeah.
How are you going to keep it? I don't know. Anyway, they make corkscrews, I guess. Maybe I should approach a corkscrew maker. So it's essentially a big two-handed sword. This is going to be useless for cutting with, although you could hit someone with it. It's not going to cut at all. But thrusting, corkscrew...
I mean, to be fair, you smack someone across the head with that. That's heavy metal. You're still going to cause some damage. At the very least, a concussion. Or you could bash their head until it cracks open. Oh, yeah, if you manage to stab that into someone and pull it out, they're dying. There's no coming back from that.
Nature would limit the penetration. So, in theory, you'd have to apply so much force to penetrate into a target with a corkscrew blade that it would make it an ineffective thrusting weapon. However, in a fantasy setting, if you're very strong and the things that you're stabbing are very big and fleshy, like elephant size, then maybe it would make sense. Yay! And he thrust with it. I was really, really hoping that he wasn't going to do a big old cut with that corkscrew blade. Because with this type of blade, it's just not going to cut. Thrusting is the way to use it. Good. Stab! I really like these massive, great stabs. He's actually using it a bit like a spear or a bayonet, and this is the right way to use this weapon, according to me anyway. It's not a cutting weapon, it's completely a thrusting weapon, but generally speaking, these are stabbing implements, and they are absolutely specialized for that. So I'm actually kind of loving this sword because it's got essentially it's an S-stock in function with some characteristics of a rapier to the hilt design, which makes it look a bit prettier than an S-stock normally does. Usually an S-stock just usually has a simple crossguard.
Yeah.
The Knight Rider Flail. So a flail, I love the fact that they called it a flail and they haven't called it a Morning Star or one of the other multiple names that get bandied around. A flail is the proper name for an articulated weapon. It has its origin in an agricultural implement that is usually two sticks which are connected via a flexible bit, sometimes just two rings. This became a specialized military weapon which sometimes involved spiky heads and a chain and then a long handle. They've actually got the proportions of this really good. So one of the common flaws we see is that the ball and chain element is longer than the shaft, which means that if you overswing, you'll hit yourself with the chain and the spiky balls.
Ouch.
In this case, the shaft is long enough such that if those balls swung around, they would hit the shaft above your hand. And that's correct. According to the artwork and everything we know about them, the majority of flails were constructed in this way, where the articulated bit was shorter than the handle element. So he's got a pair of them, which is an interesting choice. One of the big weaknesses of a flail is you can't really defend very well or barely at all with it. To begin with, the choreography or the movement, the body mechanics for how they've modelled this person using two flails is actually quite similar to how we saw him using two claws. And I think that's kind of right. So one of the secrets to using a flail successfully and not injuring yourself injuring the target is essentially thinking about the line of momentum. Okay, you can't suddenly change direction with a flail.
Yeah, no, you have to follow through.
Element at the end of it. So if you start to move in this direction and suddenly move over here, it will jerk the end around and it will just completely rob you of all momentum. So instead, you have to follow through with the motion and then come somewhere else that's continuing the full extension of the ball on the chain. So it's all about trying to keep that striking element fully extended on the chain so that your momentum is all carried up in that striking hit. Mm-hmm. And this type of movement, this flowing circular motion, does kind of represent that pretty damned well. One thing that I think is really interesting is when he comes up against these two guys, he holds one shaft, it looks like he's holding it with two hands, and just twirls the end around. When I first saw that, I thought that is genius, really, really cool. It looks awesome. And initially, I was impressed by it, but then I stopped and thought about it, and the problem with it is that instead of when you swing the whole weapon, you've got the momentum of the lever or the handle, then you've got the chain, then you've got the ball.
It'd be hard to do.
So you've essentially got something that is this far away from your hand. Now, by spinning this, you're only using the chain and the ball element. You're not really using the lever of the length and leverage of the handle. So you're only spinning a much smaller thing. It's going to have less striking force. And the problem is, as soon as it hits something, it's going to stop. So when I talked about flowing through, it's about continuing the motion. And here, when you just spin the end of this ball around, and as soon as that ball hits something, it will stop. Okay, if you're using a bouncy ball, it will bounce. But if you're using an iron ball, it will stop. And at that point, it's not going to keep spinning around. Whereas what we see here is like some kind of like cutting or like helicopter blade or something. It goes through the target and keeps on spinning. You just couldn't get that much energy with that machine. You can get that much energy into that ball for it to keep spinning. The moment it hits the opponent, it will stop spinning.
Oh, it's a big axe. Yeah.
Whoa! That is massive.
I wouldn't even be able to pick that thing up.
This is more of a typical example of how axes are represented in fantasy in general. Like way too big. I mean,
Godfrey's huge though.
Like 6
Godfrey's
times
fucking
bigger,
big.
maybe more than that. Maybe 8 times bigger than an actual poleaxe. So this person not only has got an axe that probably weighs about the same as a car engine, but is also made the very brave decision to hold a shield, a small shield, in the left hand as well. Are they going to use this one-handed? Oh man, they are. Oh, no. Yeah, I don't even know where to begin with that. How could anybody use an axe of this size?
Nobody could.
But then take an axe of this size and decide to use it one-handed. It's just not going to happen unless you're stronger than any living creature on Earth currently. And I mean, yeah, you absolutely would kill a horse with one blow with an axe of that size. There's no question there. I mean, even so, there are various weapons throughout history which have been famous for being horse killers. And of course, why would you want to kill horses? Because the enemy ride them. Okay, so it's cavalry, anti-cavalry weapons. Famously, there are accounts of the housecarls' two-handed axes being used to fell the Norman knights by chopping the horse in half.
Oh.
So, you know, in fairness, it is a colossal axe, and if you could swing it, yeah, it would be an absolute fight ender for just about any creature you hit with it.
Yeah. That's a big sword.
The Dark Moon Greatsword. It's a really
Huge.
wide sword. You know, just because you can hold something in both hands doesn't mean that it's always a good idea. Clearly, if I have a one-handed sword, I'd grab a one-handed sword. Look, here's a one-handed sword. If I grab a one-handed sword and I happen to find another one, yeah, why not hold 2 of these in both hands? Because it's a one-handed sword. But the problem with greatswords
They're two-handed
they
swords.
are so big and cumbersome, they're not one-handed swords, so why hold them in one hand? If you're doing a thrust with it, great, but using a great sword in each hand is in the real world a terrible idea. It's like, oh, why not wield a halberd in each hand, a pike in each hand? The problem is some weapons you can use in 1 or 2 hands, some weapons obviously you can use in 1 hand, and some weapons can only be, most of the time, only be sensibly used in 2 hands. Using greatsword in each hand it doesn't really work, but clearly this character's strong enough to do it, so what the hell. So in terms of the actual movements, I quite like it. So it tends to be, from what I've seen so far, quite one.
Yeah, even though they are clearly too big for any mortal to use, I'm glad that they still give it weight. You know, it's the same thing as the giant axe. They gave it a lot of weight. Like, you still needed to use his whole body to try and get it back up over the shoulder. And then when he brings it on down to the ground to swipe it across, like, you still feel the great weight of it all. You know, it's not like they're not wielding it like a toothpick, you know? There's still a lot of weight there. Like, your character is really strong. Stronger than any mortal, but, like, they still gave it that weight. And that is what I respect about Elden Ring over Final Fantasy games when it comes to gigantic weapons.
Directional, so it tends to be a blow with one arm and then a blow with the other arm following the exact same path and usually to about the same target. This is actually something we see in treatises done with sticks and swords as well across the centuries, and across whether you're looking at Southeast Asia or Northern Europe or wherever, we can find systems that the movements are quite big and wide, but then again they have to be because these are massive swords.
Yeah.
Overall, that sword I thought was completely plausible and I liked it as a greatsword as a two-handed sword. I wasn't really happy with taking a greatsword and turning it into a sword in each hand. It doesn't make sense. You can't do that with a pair of greatswords. It's not. I find it difficult to buy into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Giza's wheel. So it's like a Catherine wheel then. Great iron wheel lined with flesh-flaying blades. Device of torture. Usually weapons of torture are not great weapons of war. So it's actually kind of like a chainsaw. Given what it is, it's kind of like a chainsaw or a strimmer. Using it as a thrusting weapon kind of makes sense, I guess. If this was a real thing, that kind of makes sense. Just using it like a giant axe or a mace, and then sometimes thrusting with the spinning end. Yeah, I guess that's how it would be used if it was a real thing.
You want me to go back to the description? Great iron wheel lined with flesh, flaying blades, device of torture used by Inquisitor Giza. As the wheel spins, it causes severe pain and blood loss.
Flaying blades. Device of torture. Usually...
The design was adopted for use as the iconic weapon wielded by Iron Virgins. There you go.
That's how it would be used if it was a real thing.
There we go. Y'all, these whips were cool.
Oh, a petal whip. Okay, so whips, a normal bullwhip is a terrible weapon, and lots of people will tell you that they reach a supersonic speed at the tip, and that's where you get the crack from, and all these sorts of things. And you know, if you're Indiana Jones, you can use it for swinging across caverns, and you can slash people's faces open. The fact is that compared to normal weapons in a normal military or war setting, a whip is useless. Can't do anything to someone in any kind of thick clothing or armor, definitely. And you just take one hit, close in, grab it. It's a rubbish weapon. However, if you could make the whip of blades, so
that
people have tried to do this in history. There have been types of articulated bladed weapons. Probably the most famous comparable weapon is the Indian weapon. It's always India that comes with the wackiest ideas for weapons. There's a fantastic array of Indian weapons. It's called an urumi. An urumi is essentially a long strip of sharpened steel. It's not exactly like a whip. It's usually described as a type of sword. However, it has a very long and flexible whip-like blade that is edged and tipped, and you can twirl it around and slash it around, and it's very intimidating. How is this going to work? Let's see. Oh, okay, so that's a bit surprising.
That's horrifying. What the... Humans are messed up. Holy shit. Yeah, no thank you. What the fuck? Yeah, I'd be running. Forget that.
So one thing I do like, it's got quite a considerable handle or shaft size on it, which means in reality, if this was a real weapon, there are certain things you can do with that shaft by itself without the whip part, especially including defensively. And one of the problems with the whip is it's got no defense at all. It's all attack, and not even a very good attack. But when you've got a decent amount of shaft, as you find on a flail or a warhammer or an axe, then you can defend with that shaft. You can block with it. So I like that. And also, you notice it's got the adaptation of a handguard on this one. So to me, it looks like the designers of this weapon have thought this through, and they've gone, okay, we need to be able to block and defend with essentially a big extended handguard, but then you've got your whip ready to lash out when you use it. That's a pretty clever design, and I quite like it. Now, in question, the question of how this would affect the targets, is it cutting? Is it whipping? Is it raking? I don't really know. And actually, I don't really care that much. I think that a weapon with this length and with that amount of momentum to it, if you had blades pointing or spikes pointing in multiple directions, it would have a kind of clawing or raking effect on the target. It wouldn't cut like a sword or an axe, but it would certainly be really quite nasty to be hit by. It probably wouldn't be very effective on people in armor, but against creatures not wearing any clothes or against people just in civilian clothes, I think it would have an awful lot of effect because of the speed and momentum, really the velocity of that moving object. It's light, but it's moving with a lot of...
Yeah, no, a lot of these weapons are not meant to go up against armored targets, realistically.
speed and acceleration. So I think it would have a lot of effect on fleshy targets and not very much effect on armored targets. I love that extending, elastic, stretchy spring whip. I want one of those. I want one of those, mate. I want to see what it does. But the way it was represented on screen, to my mind, totally looked believable if you could make such a thing for how it would move. And I love the fact that it didn't pass through the floor like God of War or something might do, but it actually stopped on the floor and retracted back. I love the fact that it was an elliptical path, so it wasn't a circular path. It stretched out to hit the target and then retracted back into the handle again at the end. Beautifully done. So I think that's my favorite fantasy weapon that I have seen in I can't remember how long, because it's a genuinely fresh,
it's also
genuinely
unique
fantasy weapon that doesn't exist in the real world. It's only loosely based on historical things, but it was represented in a believable, plausible way that appeared to follow the laws of physics.
For more Elden Ring, make sure to watch part 1 with Matt reacting to Elden Ring weapons, or our IGN Expert Reacts playlist for plenty more great videos.
Yeah, no, I thought that that whip was really cool. Alright, catch you later, S1. I feel like most of the weapons, besides, you know, the ones that you get from, like, the demigods and whatnot, in Elden Ring were pretty damn believable. They felt very realistic. I love the weight that they added to it. Excuse me. Oh god, Bang, she's so cute. What on earth? She's getting so cozy. I really appreciated how they did the weapons in Elden Ring. I really love how they all feel different. I haven't experimented with too many different weapons, to be honest, because I was a gravity mage. In my new game plus, I'm gonna try to not use magic, maybe some incantations, but I think I want to try and go melee. It's gonna be way harder because gravity magic is definitely very overpowered. But I think that I'm just kind of also missing out on a lot of awesome gameplay. So I think I'm gonna try and go melee for my new game plus. There might be a couple bosses where I go back to magic, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Either way, I'm gonna beat it with gravity magic, and then when I do eventually return, I'm gonna try and do melee. It's gonna suck, but, you know, what can you do? Bang, you're so cozy, but I need my arm back. It's game time. She's giving me licks. She's like, don't move. Yeah, you know, see, here's the thing. When it comes to, like, in Dark Souls 3, I was definitely a sword and shield kind of person. Like, I really love using great shields. I loved using a great shield. So that might be what I end up doing. I'm not a big fan of dual wielding weapons in games, but I am a big sword and great shield kind of person. Dupe your save files so you can go back to the start. Yeah. There's a great shield that has a cannon built into it. That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I'll see what I end up finding. I'm sure there's I mean, I just want a beautiful great shield that's also effective. You know, Elden bling and all that. Bang, I gotta get my arm up. She's so cozy, though. She's, like, entwined around my hand. She was kind of slipping and falling before, but now, I don't know. See what I mean? She's got me. She's got me in her clutches. She's become so much more cuddly. Adds a lot of incentive for using Great Shield. Just block the blow and hit them on the... Yeah, I mean, honestly, using Great Shield has been so useful. It has helped me so much with so many different enemies in Dark Souls 3. Bang, you're not gonna like what I'm about to do. Should I do it?